You're listening to the Second Look podcast, where we take a closer look at what we're learning each Sunday at Connection Church to help you grow in your walk with Christ. Here are your hosts, Pastor Joe Terreri and Pastor Dan DeRochers.
Welcome to The Second Look. My name is Dan.
And I'm Joe.
And we're here talking about I Promise, Philly. But first, hey,
Get
Joe.
out of here, Dan. Yes.
Joe, did you have any bullies when you were younger?
Like that bullied me?
Yes, or were you the bully?
I definitely.
This is either or.
Wow.
Okay?
Okay. So the honest answer is I was never a bully, ever.
Okay, so-
that just wasn't my thing.
So you were bullied.
No, I was. I mean, maybe some. So have you ever heard of like little man syndrome? It's one of my favorite things to talk about.
Yes.
Yeah, little man syndrome is so basically when people who are not tall in stature feel the need to give bigger people a hard time.
Yeah.
I encountered a few of those people. Like they're just trying to.
How's the weather up there?
No, like just feeling like they need to act tough around me
Yeah.
because I was usually the biggest guy. I encountered a couple of those kinds of people, but for the most part, not really. I was pretty easy to get along with.
You were kind of run of the mill. You were not polarizing.
No,
in a
I
way.
was not a polarizing figure. And the height of my popularity in school was in the fourth grade. And then from
Wow.
there, it went downhill.
Wow,
So,
that's-
I was very
that's-
popular in fourth grade and then not so much, pretty much exclusively after that.
Wow, I was bullied.
Yeah.
when I was in
whoa,
school.
Knocked me over with a feather. Keep going.
I don't know how to take that. I was thinking about this.
Maybe I was a bully. Keep going.
Wow, you are now. I was thinking about it because I was just thinking about like when I was in grade school, and a lot of people say, wow, middle school is so tough. Middle
Yeah.
school is actually when I kind of like found my personality.
Yeah.
But in grade school, I was not treated well. In early middle school, I wasn't treated well. And I remember this defining moment when I stood up to my first bully.
Oh, that's an important moment in a young man's life.
It really is, and it was kind of that moment that I realized that it wasn't because of me, it was because of my projected weakness.
Yeah.
Like it was actually because I was an easy target.
Yep.
And when I stood up to that bully, I wasn't an easy target anymore.
Yeah, and then they move on.
For the most part.
Yeah, but yeah, bullies are real easy to figure out. They're just real insecure, and all you need to do is stand up to them once, and they're usually just move on to their next victim. So
Yeah, no, and
they just need psychotherapy, and everything will be fine.
it does happen later in life, much of the time. And we're talking today about how God is attracted to weakness.
Yeah.
About how
Oh, that's why we started talking about
Yeah.
it. I was like, "Where's this going?" I was literally like, "Why are we talking about this?" I'm like, usually I know why we're talking about these things, and then I'm like, why are we talking about this?
this is probably the most direct
This is
connection
direct.
to the
Listen,
text
I
that
slept
I've ever
so
made
good
in the
last night
introduction.
too. So I had my coffee this morning. I'm feeling good, but that's hilarious. This podcast may not be good. What else is new? Keep going.
So one of the things that you said yesterday was that God is attracted to weakness.
Absolutely.
And I thought it was interesting at the beginning of your message that you made it clear that God's vision for his church is not that everyone would be poor, ugly, and dumb.
Right.
Right? That there's not anything wrong with being wealthy, beautiful, successful, influential, and intelligent.
Yes.
So if we are those things, what does weakness look like for us?
Yeah, and I think, I just go back to what Jesus says in the Beatitudes. It's really about blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And so I think that Jesus really lays out this vision for the fact that you can actually not come to him. Like what the gospel requires is faith, and at the bottom of faith is an acknowledgement that I'm not it. So there is a God and I'm not it. And so I believe that what the weakness that God is attracted to is this sense of knowing our own need for him, because God can't work through our lives until we know how deeply we need him.
Yeah.
And so this kind of like bravado and machismo and kind of strutting that happens in people's lives, and honestly sometimes in God's kingdom, it's just so silly, because number one, that's not how Jesus lived his life. I mean, he stood up to his bullies, Stan, and he stood up to his bullies with truth, and they hated it, and then they killed him. Yeah. But I do think that there's just, at the core of the gospel message, to receive it into your life, to receive Christ, is a requirement to acknowledge, both to yourself and to the Lord, that you are in desperate need of his grace and his mercy.
Why do you think we tend to just want to feel like we can do it ourselves?
Well,
Like,
I think
why are we so seemingly self-sufficient, or we want to project self-sufficiency?
Well, because I think that's the message we're being told all the time is to be successful means to be independent and autonomous. And so we really think of success in terms of self-sufficiency. And listen, we don't want to be there's an unhealthy way to be like overly codependent on people. So that's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But we are kind of told that strength is good, weakness is bad. And we see this all over the place. I mean, you don't want any of your politicians who you're going to vote for to even our current president. I mean, what do people normally dog him for? His policies, but also his age.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, he's going to be 82 when his term is over. And so like, and you watch people on both sides of the aisle just look at their politicians and they're trying to what? Point out their weaknesses.
Yeah.
And so, and listen, I get that. That's the game of politics, and I'm not making a political statement. It's just an observation. But we love when people are strong. We want our leaders to be strong. We want our spouses to be strong. We want our kids to grow up to be strong. And so when we kind of live in this world where even as God's people, we tacitly sometimes are saying the unspoken message, I want strength, not weakness.
Yeah.
And I think something for me that really has stood out about this is, raising a daughter with a disability and just literally having to spend my life now around someone who is physically weak. You start to notice things about people that I wouldn't even realize if it wasn't for her. So I'm not putting myself in a good light here, but you start to realize, like, in order for people to really know and be around Lucy, they have to slow down and they need to sit with her because, even in the stage Lucy's in right now, she can't go anywhere or do anything. And so in order to really connect with her, you have to stop.
Yeah.
You have to actually stop being productive. You can't get anything done. You have to put away your task list and you need to sit and you need to be with her. And like, Dan, you and I'm not saying this for this reason, but you and your wife Alicia came over to her house on Friday morning and sat with Lucy for like 2 hours, which was like the coolest thing ever. And I'm not telling the story because of that, but it's like, you actually get what I'm saying. Like, You have to stop. And so I think that we are so valuing productivity and busyness that this whole idea of slowing down to get to know someone can feel kind of counterproductive. And so there's just like a little window in my mind into the weakness that's required to kind of come to the Lord. It's like, like spiritually, we're a lot like Lucy. Like, we can't get out of bed and we can't do it. We need God's help. And that's what God wants from us, this acknowledgement of I am the one in the middle of the road in the parable of the Good Samaritan who really needs to be rescued.
I feel like there are times in our life where we feel like we can do it and we want to prove that we can do something on our own. But sometimes when we end up doing the thing, whatever that is, it's really not that satisfying. I found some of the most satisfying times of my life is when I know I can't do it.
Yep.
And I have to rely on God.
Yeah.
I mean, have you found this to be true as well? Like,
Yeah, I think the growth areas, first of all, I do want to say, when you're growing up, I do think it's important to discover your strength and realize you can do things on your own. Like, I actually think that's an important part of human development. So I want to be careful to say, like that's a good part about becoming a fully functional, healthy adult. However, I also agree with what you're saying in the sense that I think the best spiritual growth times in our lives is when we're in the deep end of the pool and we realize I can't do this on my own and I need other people. I need, basically, if God doesn't come through for me here, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And I think the moment we feel like we're holding all things together, instead of what Colossians 1, verses 15 through 20 talks about, where Jesus Christ has all the supremacy and he's holding things together, I think when we live in that space, that we're not the ones holding it all together and it has to be God, I think that's a beautiful place where we just get to see God work in our lives, in our church, in our families. That there is this place, and I kind of use this phrase, like sometimes I'll watch people's lives and I'll just kind of like know that, like, because I've seen God do it in my own life, like God will just sometimes like break us down.
Yeah.
Like there will be times God will let us walk through. It's like, yep, he's just breaking us down right now. And it's really his love and his care and his concern for us that he lets us get broken down. Because when we feel like we got it, we're actually living in a fantasy because we don't got it. We don't ever got it. And so I think what Jesus loved about the church in Philadelphia is that they never feel like they had it. Like they're basically like, what do we have? We can cling to the word of God. We cannot deny his name, and we can keep enduring patiently. And Jesus is attracted to that.
I want to go back to something that you just said a minute ago and ask you about times in our life where it feels like life is kind of piling on us.
Yep.
Like things aren't going well at your job, and your daughter sprains her temporal mandibular joint.
Yes.
And like when all this stuff is happening,
Yeah.
and you've got sickness running through your house, and you've got family issues. I mean, we're coming into Thanksgiving. We're going to be reminded of some of the dysfunction
Of everyone's weaknesses, yes.
Right. So
including our own.
So you had said like we're being broken down, or God is allowing us to be broken down. Can you address some of those points in our life? I think sometimes say God is making me go through this,
Yeah.
or God is allowing me to go through this. Like, what is our theology on going through painful parts of our life where like just stuff is not lining up for us?
Yeah. I think about when Abraham had to sacrifice his son Isaac. And I think about when the Lord told him to take Isaac up the mountain and sacrifice him to the Lord.
Yeah.
And so there's this whole scene, I believe it's Genesis 22, and Abraham and Isaac go up, and Isaac's like, "Hey Dad, I got the wood, where's the sacrifice?" And you can imagine that moment when Isaac's like, "Oh, wait a minute."
The music changes.
Yeah, the music
Yeah.
changes. And so, Abraham goes forward and he's about to kill his son, and then God stops him, and then God says, "Now I know." And it's kind of like, wait a minute. You're telling me that Abraham had to go through all of that with his son Isaac, think he's going to kill him because God didn't actually know where Abraham's heart is.
Oh, wow.
And so here's what I think God is doing. Our tests and trials and things that we walk through in our life, they're doing two things. They're showing and growing, okay? So they're showing us where we're really at, and then they're meant to grow us from that place. And so when I'm sitting around the Thanksgiving table with people who drive me bonkers, and by the way, that never happens in my life.
No, mine either.
I said to Brandon Shower, who led worship yesterday, I'm like, I was talking about you, like, because I have to eat Thanksgiving with Brandon, by the way, the easiest guy in the world to get along with. But they show you and grow you. So when you're sitting around the Thanksgiving table, or you're at church and someone's driving you nuts, or, you have that coworker, like when you're walking through things, especially in relationships, they're showing you where you're at. They're revealing your heart. See, that's what we don't realize about our relationships. Our relationships are revealing, and not like our good relationships. Our good relationships fill our hearts, but our tough relationships, they show us where our hearts are at, and then they're meant to grow us. And I would say everything in our lives, every trial we walk through is meant to show us and grow us. And so I think that's what God is always up to. I like this phrase, like God is always more interested in our holiness than our happiness. Like, it's not that God doesn't care about our happiness. He's just more interested in our holiness. So really, the goal of our lives, and I get this from Romans 8:29, the goal of our lives is to be conformed. That's why we've been saved, is to be conformed into the image of Jesus. Like God is working in our lives right now, in your life and my life and everyone who's listening, to make us more like Christ.
Yeah.
And it's actually in the trial. It's not on the mountaintop when we've got, when we just won the Powerball, okay? And all of a sudden life's easy. It's actually in the trial, in the difficulty, in the toughness that God is showing us where we're at, and he's growing us into holiness to become more like Jesus. And that's actually because he loves us, and because he cares about us, and because our lives are about his glory and not our own.
It's interesting you say that, because in this text, we're seeing, and your points yesterday, the things that Jesus promises a church that perseveres, none of the things, right? The 3 points were vindication, preservation, and identification.
Yeah.
None of those things have to do with us coming out on top.
Well, in the end,
In the
bitter end,
right?
like the end, like the ultimate end.
Not so that we can be successful
It's
or
so
live our
funny.
best life.
Before I fell
now.
asleep last night, I was thinking about that. I was just like, yeah, sometimes I have my best thoughts about my message after I preach it, but that's okay. So
That's
I
why
was
we do
thinking,
this.
yeah, that's why we do this. But I was thinking about that very thing. Like, what does Jesus actually promise his church? It's like vindication at the end, preservation, like to get to the end, and identification, like even the eternal identity we talked about at the end. And so, yeah, and I think sometimes we think about God, what he's going to do for us here, and it's not that God doesn't bless us richly in our earthly lives. He does. He blesses us. He gives us favor. He gives us joy. He provides and meets our needs, and oftentimes more than our needs and even our wants. I just never want to downplay the goodness of God in the land of the living that we experience here. But when we read the scriptures, we have to wrestle with the reality that the promises that Jesus makes to the persevering church are really to get us home.
Yeah.
And it's not so that everything, and there's never a whiff in the scriptures that everything's going to be great between here and the grave. We know we're going to go through the peaks and we're going to go through the valleys. And here's the great news. Here's what's always promised: the presence of God in it, and the ultimate victory of God's people at the end.
Joe, is there anything that you didn't get to yesterday that you thought maybe you would want to get to at the sermon?
Yeah, I think the only thing I didn't really cover yesterday was verse 11, where Jesus says, I am coming soon. And Jesus, one of the promises he makes, so I kind of covered 3 promises yesterday, but kind of packaged them. There's probably 6 different promises that Jesus makes in that, but for the sake of time and coherence, I kind of packaged it as 3. But one of the things I love that Jesus says is, I am coming soon. Hold on to what you have so you do not lose your crown. And I think one of the major promises, and we see this all throughout the New Testament, is that Jesus promises to come back for his church.
Yeah.
And if we die before that happens, he's going to bring us with him when he comes back. And if it happens when we're on earth, we will see him. Literally, he tells his disciples, in the same way that you saw me go, you're going to see me go back to heaven, is the same way you're going to see me come back to earth. Yeah. And so I just believe, as God's people, we need to live in a constant awareness that Jesus will return. Now, that shouldn't hamstring our lives and alter our decisions about, saving money and being responsible and those kind of things.
Sure.
But we do, as the people of God, need to live with an awareness that Jesus is coming back for us. And our hope is ultimately that when he returns, he's going to right all wrongs. He's going to vindicate us. Yeah. And that he is going to consummate his kingdom. And he is going to turn everything right side up that's currently upside down. Or as the Jesus Storybook Bible puts it, he's going to make all the sad things come untrue.
Yeah,
and so that should be an anchor of hope for our souls, no matter what we walk through in life, even when we feel like we have little strength.
So when Jesus does that, are we going to bully our bullies?
We'll let him bully our bullies for us.
Okay, all right, that sounds fine.
Yeah.
That sounds fine. Well, this has been another episode of The Second Look. You can catch this sermon and much more at our website, cometoconnect.com. Have a great week.